This is as groovy as it gets.
Oprah, Can You Hear Me? Oprah vs. Donald 2020 is a conversation by Julie Benetti and Susan Barbaro and a production of EI Alliance, copyright 2019. America is courtesy of New Threads off their new album, Felonious Wilma.
Hey, this is Julie and I'm here with Susan, and we can't get enough in about those debates last night. It was only the first one, so I'm going to watch as much as I can tonight just because, you know, it's blasted as the big one. You know, it's funny. It's a second night premiere. There you go. Oh my God. And, you know, we talked about the media a little bit in the last one, and I forgot to mention that the media actually said, oh, you know, we made a mistake. Look, nobody mentioned Biden, because they all thought that all the candidates were going to mention Biden. And I thought that was funny because I didn't think any of the I didn't know what the candidates were going to, I didn't even know who the candidates were, you know, except for the ones that we know who have been highlighted as, you know, they're running, you know, and we know you and I are like, yeah, Oprah? Yeah. She's got that special date coming up, so we know she's going to declare that. And you know what? Who in their right mind would put themselves through this? Okay, in the beginning, I could see why she wouldn't say, okay, I'm going to run for president right now. Who the heck wants to get up on a stage with 10 people? Right. One of two nights. I mean, she could pull a Donald Trump, and she could be like, well, I'm going to bring in all the ratings, and, you know, she would. So, you know, we're going to kind of mold this podcast into what we were kind of ended with in the last podcast, what we would look for in a candidate, energy-wise. And you know, it's funny, I wanted to say I would look for, I mean, you would hope, because we started to say that, you know, you want the person to come in that kind of has the right attributes and energy that would raise Donald Trump to his game, you know, so he's kind of really getting in the spirit of it. He tweeted last night, boring, because, yeah, I agree, it was boring, you know, the debates were boring. So I would kind of say, and I need to clarify this, I would say I would look for a female version Trump. And I don't want to say Omarosa, because I know we had a podcast very early on, and I did read her book. It was very interesting. And we had a podcast about that, and she seemed to really have some interesting insight into him. And again, once again, I know it's a book, I don't know her. And so that is kind of what I would look for, and I think there's more to say about that, because we can say, you know, yeah, we're concerned about quote unquote the issues. There are a lot of issues, but it's not wholly. Well, it's not wholly about the issues.
So I don't think when we talk about, it's interesting because we started talking about all of the different candidates that show up. And they all have, you know, of course, every time you talk, I mean, you've never listened to a candidate and you completely disagree with them. I mean, unless you're the far right or on the far left and you're so skewed, the average person can listen and every candidate sounds good. I mean, if you listen to them when they talk about the issues. And so it's interesting because when you talk about someone who's going to make Trump up his game, well, you're talking about having an interesting debate. Because somebody who's going to make him up his game makes the debates more entertaining. These guys won't do it. And, you know, tomorrow night I can't talk about the candidates because I really don't even know who they are, other than, of course, like we said, the big ones, you know, Biden and Bernie Sanders. And but if I think about it, the reason I ask is because, you know, we're talking a lot about, you know, the person who can really be themselves. And I always sit and, you know, and I'm sure plenty of people do, when you see something going on, how would I handle it, right? Yeah. That's always what you say. What would I do? What would I do if, you know, Trump comes out and calls me, you know, I don't know, he comes up with a name, because he comes up with a name for everyone. And I'm like, how would I handle it? Because I really don't support bullying. I don't. Actually, it's something I really get really upset about, because for the obvious reasons. I don't have to say because why. So when he bullies, I always lose a lot of respect for him, because because I sit and I think, you know, if you're really being yourself, and I keep thinking, I just would not address him. You know, when you work with a bully, you just don't address them, and you go to who am I, and what's important to me, because literally, when I listen to these people, any of these people who he mentioned, when they start talking about, oh, I this, and they're trying to manipulate, oh, I understand this situation because of whatever this, I have this person in my family, I grew up this way. It has no impact. It doesn't impact. I don't believe it.
Right.
That's what I'm going to say. I don't believe it.
Right.
But if you're going to step up, who would I really want to have doing that? I want somebody who is just true to who they are, because if you are true, and now I understand it, because if you are true to who you are, you hear about what goes on in the White House, and a lot of things are boom, 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 boom. This happened, we need to respond. There's no, let's sit down and have a meeting and discuss it, and yeah, they have meetings and it goes, but it's like, boom, you need to respond right away.
Right.
And you would like to think that the person that is going to perform their best under that kind of pressure and those circumstances is the person that can find that space of who they are and can engage in the energy of what's occurring, and not manipulate. If we talk about, because they were talking a lot about the school shootings, we're all completely manipulated by that when it occurs, because we're all in shock, we're all in fear to a degree, and when you're in that state of mind, you are very easily manipulated. Right. That's science. We're all open to suggestion at that point. We're looking for that. So
case in point, the talking about the father and the daughter, which was horrifying, and the picture that went all over the internet and all over the news, there was a little bit of manipulation there, because each candidate kind of took it and gave more of the story and gave more, and what you're talking about, is live and occurring right now with the candidates that are there. So if you're going to
trust somebody, and again, they've talked about, you go for the charismatic person, you go for who you believe to be an expert. You look for that when you're in any kind of distress, and you're looking for answers. And between 9/11 and, like I said, school shootings and a lot of these things that are occurring real time, and when it happens, we all look for that. We look for that guidance. And if you're going to open up to that, you want someone who's not going to manipulate, but is going to have the clarity and the presence to be in the moment and think. And when you have somebody that comes up and they have, here are all our cards, and this is what we say, and here's a question, well, I want to talk about this because that's what I prepared for. That doesn't give you that sense of comfort of when something happens out of the blue, immediate, and there needs to be a response. You want the person that can be in the space of who they are and be present, instead of saying, what is the rhetoric that we say when this happens? Right. What is it we say to people to make them feel good? Because in all honesty, I think a lot of people are sick of hearing, we're going to change the gun laws. I'm just going to use that as an example. They're not going to change. If you want to change something, you have to work with the NRA. You're not going to go and change it. And even if you think you can, people do things illegally. Changing what is going on is going to come from a space other than saying we're going to close down, shut down the NRA. It's not going to happen. And when someone says that's the answer to the problem of school shootings, that gives me absolutely no comfort and no sense of who are you? You're just repeating the same old stuff.
Right. So, it's funny because in our book as well...
I didn't mean to keep going on, but I can't help it.
Well, you're being specific
very passionate.
With points in that relate to the energy. And in our book, Donald J. Trump, do you stand with him? Who does he stand with? The science and energy behind Trump. We talk about how he uses the energy. And we talk about how he uses it to win. And we talk about, a lot of stuff has come up in conversation lately about how and this is funny because the news reports it and doesn't really know what they're saying. So they're reporting that, people in his cabinet, and there's, people going to work, and there's an uncertainty. They don't know, are they working? Are they not? How long they'll have their job? Oh, here's, the news shows show how much turnover there's been. There's complete uncertainty, and you know where I'm going here because we talk about this, and it just makes me go, wow, because as a person, you and I have uncertainty in our lives. What do? Well, we figure it out, and you try to become, if this is where you're going and how you're trying to figure things out, you're trying to be mindful and present, you try to be comfortable with uncertainty. So, Donald Trump is amazingly comfortable with uncertainty. He thrives in it. And to look at it, and it doesn't surprise me that he has a huge amount of turnover in his staff. Because if he rallies around and uncertainty is going on around him, is it then going on in him? Probably not. Who knows? Yet, how insane is that to look at, because we all run away from uncertainty. We all try to, like you said, we go to that charismatic person who has the answer. Who are we to say that that's not a subjective answer?
No, it's completely subjective. That's what I'm saying.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
Completely subjective. That's the point.
And all day long, we're persuaded, whether it's through advertising, through news, through, you and I are not trying to persuade, convince, or do any of that crap with anyone. We're really trying to stay present. We're looking at the energy, and we're having a good time kind of looking at the energy and talking about the energy and what we think is occurring, because we think differently, and you have to think differently. You have to see in the space between. And so when they get up and say, this is really bad, when the reporters come out and say, this is really bad, look at this whole turnover, look at this uncertainty.
That's once again.
It tells us he thrives in uncertainty. And so when we're saying, what are we looking for in a candidate, you said it. They all came out with their talking points. I said it. They're writing down their notes before. It's like they're taking a test. This is what I have to say. When the question comes, they don't listen.
No.
They're not listening. They're not responding to the space and the moment.
I think, is at the point where people, and I think what's important about this podcast is we're not saying the answer. I think what we're doing is we're starting to define what people can't define.
Right.
What is it about this that they don't like? It's boring? Sure, you could say we prefer it entertaining, and that's why someone to push Trump would make the debate between ultimately the Democratic candidate and Trump more interesting.
Right.
But I'm not even interested in that. If you go to the space of it, what is it? It's like when you talk to someone and they're a robot. If you call up, it's funny because I had an issue and I had to call someone, and they're just reading a pad answer. And it's like, well, but wait a second, this is the situation. Well, we don't do this. No, I understand, but because of this, and they just keep reading the same answer, and like, hello, am I talking to anyone? And I think that's what you kind of get the feeling of when you listen to this. And are they really speaking from their soul? And it's again, that's why we call it a career politician.
Right.
They've learned to say what needs to be said to get to the next space. Don't say anything, and even the stuff we're talking about. If you want to go in, we were, we talked about Bill de Blasio, and he's got a black son, and how can he, someone could turn around and say, oh, you're being racist. You have no idea what the black man has gone through. And no, I don't. I'm not being racist. I'm simply saying, you're not going to tell me you know something based on that. I'm not getting into the specifics of any of it. I'm going to just the basic fact is, you're throwing all this information at me, and you're feeding me that, oh, I can do this because I'm going to tell you this. And I'm turning around and say, baloney. That doesn't mean anything to me. Show me. And I think that's what people feel, but they haven't even been, because we talk about mindfulness and presence.
Right.
That is not what anyone on the news is going to talk about.
They're not gonna,
or any other candidate. Even Trump's not going to talk about
because
it.
that doesn't serve their goal.
Exactly.
I mean, they want to keep telling us the story of the Russians. Give me another $4 million a year.
But then they're stupid because then they sit there and they don't want to and they don't want to ask, well, what is he doing? What is he doing?
No, they don't want, they ask, but they don't want the answer.
Right.
Because then, what? I can go home early? Gee, don't people need me to blab on TV? And it's funny, you brought up, and I'm not pointing at you, but you brought up about Bill de Blasio and his child, and it's funny, because he won, because he made you think of it. Like you mentioned it, and I'm not picking on you, because I'm thinking, where do I go with that? I tried to dissuade that. It's like, I don't want to be persuaded. That does nothing for me. And like you said, it does nothing for you. I mean, what is he trying to prove?
Well, I just had awareness of it, and I'm using...
Yet the funny thing of where I go is I go to, it sounds like absolutely fabulous. They made a whole joke about that, when the daughter came, my God, this is, and it's funny because at the end of the night, I'm not going to mention his name, he said, adios, Donald Trump. And I thought, the only thing I thought of when I heard that was Soup Nazi. I went right into Seinfeld. Adios, muchachos. When he's trying to order soup. I thought, what are you trying to persuade me?
Well,
you have some into this, that you're going to guide the country, that you can, no, that's not going to work. This doesn't work in exactly what you said. For, the presence. And, it's not convincing. It's showing us. Show us. Go out and do it. Show it. Do I want to hear a story?
I don't even think it's it's funny because I said show it. I think, so it's interesting because there's no formula for showing it. There's no formula in you just it's in you. It just exudes from you.
Right.
And that's why you can't pinpoint and say, oh, you need to say this, you need to dress this way, you need to make them think. You can manipulate, but something, a sophisticated person, even if you're, I don't want to, say unsophisticated, but even if you can't pinpoint, something's off.
And I'm not
feel something's off.
Right, and I'm not saying you have to set up a situation to show it. You show it in your every action.
But
you show it in what you do. It's who you are. So the show is not the word I'm looking for. It's part of exactly what you said, who you are.
So so if you're the candidate looking to go ahead. Sorry.
No, so when you're so I just want to get at this one point. So when you're trying to convince, and we have this conversation about other stuff, when you're trying to convince, who are you trying to convince? Not me. You're trying to convince yourself of something, so then you're not that. So when you're trying to convince, and so all these candidates trying to convince us doesn't do anything. Who are they trying to convince? Themselves. They're not that. Donald Trump doesn't stand out there and try to convince us. And, that's not me saying, vote for Donald Trump. That's not me saying any of that. That's me saying that who could be the candidate?
They are trying to manipulate. And the problem is that Trump changed it. That there was I'm not saying he's being authentic or not, but that feeling with that je ne sais pas, that that you don't know how to define it, of him being who he is, changed the whole idea of a political candidate. We all kind of knew they were all fake. That was always the big joke. The candidate gets up and says, okay, where are we today? Yeah, here we, okay, well, I'll gotta say this. Oh, tomorrow you're going to be here, so make sure you say that. That has kind of gone by the wayside, because the minute you feel that sense of who he is, and Trump, we've said, is being who he is, whether you like him or not, there's something to that. When someone is who they are, even if it's not 100%, when you feel that, you can't go back to the old way of being. And I think that's changed a little bit, because they are trying to convince us, and Trump is too. I don't look at it as he's not trying to, but I think it's also a situation of, once you felt that, a little bit of authenticity.
That's funny, because I think he persuades in the words he uses with the issues. because the lunacy of the conversation about the issues, and we had this in the last couple of podcasts that we've been doing, is that, who knows what's going to occur once you get in there. We all saw the movie Dave, with the president.
Didn't see it.
I mean, who knows what's going to occur? And so the convincing part and the presence part are really important for yourself. I mean, because if you're not there, then where are you? And if you're reciting talking points and analogies and stories, you're not there talking to us. Who are you talking to? And, what would have been really cool last night was if someone came out and talked to Donald Trump. Then you would have gotten a response tweet. Nobody talked to him.
Right.
Nobody stepped up. And really, he's the president, and he has another term available, so he's the one that's going to be running and that they're going to be running against. So if while they were all fighting to, speak the best high school Spanish that they could, that whole part was missing. And once again, I agree that, the persuasion was there and the presence was not there, and trying to convince us was part of the persuasion, and I didn't fall for it, and I hope a lot of people didn't fall for it. And I think there's, also the news is trying to convince us. And we had a conversation earlier because we were talking about our book, because our book really tells how Donald Trump wins. How he wins. And our book really tells that with the energy, and it goes into that. And, I have no interest in persuading or convincing anybody about that, because I know the energy. So, so when we kind of rally around, what we look for in a candidate, energy-wise, I mean, again, we can't go against the point that, it's not a fight against Joe Biden. It's, a competition with Donald Trump, who's the president.
Well, they right now are trying to fight each other. But I just, when you say that, I think you have a little bit, you meaning the proverbial you, have a little bit more faith in anything when you meet somebody who, and I always say appears, because I'm not going to sit here, but you can sense when someone is truly and authentically who they are. With, I always say, with all their warts and pimples and everything else, because nobody's perfect. And if we're looking for perfection, well, then you've fallen for the manipulation of somebody else.
Right.
Because none of us are perfect, but the candidate that puts forth their best self is really the candidate that you have to have the most faith in, because they're at least willing to look at the issue, whatever the issue is, and try to be fair and clear in what the true pursuit of the best practice is. And so that, to me, is at least what Donald Trump puts forward. That's why it doesn't matter if I like him or not. And I think Oprah has made a career about really being who you are. And, if you're going to be the best of who you are, I mean, maybe it is something that she steps into. And we can all really relate to Oprah, because she's appeared to be herself and opens up who she is and talks about her own issues. And wouldn't that be a huge attraction for people?
I agree. And it's funny because we've seen Donald Trump now in action and not. I mean, he's been, and we've done podcasts in the past on that he's the president. And as much as, the news wants to say, they're looking, people want to impeach him, and he's still the president. He's still there. He's the president. And oftentimes, we don't hear what he's doing. We get the sound bites that are useful, once again, for the persuasion of the news. And the funny thing is, you want to say, well, who's relative to that same capacity? We've seen Oprah in action. And we've said this in other podcasts. We know her, even if we don't know her. We kind of convince ourselves that we know her.
So, Oprah, we said all of this, step it up, and you know what? Or if you really want to go and beat Trump, there is a way of doing it, and we do outline it in our book. And you know, people could turn around and say, well, you know, you're not up running against Trump, and if I really wanted to, I would. But you know something, that's not really what is my goal. But if it is your goal, there's a way of doing it, and there's not a way of doing it. And going back to the way things were is not the answer.
Thank you for listening to this production from EI Alliance. Check out our Amazon authors pages for books and podcasts, along with our Donald Trump and Oprah books for this series. Find great music by New Threads on iTunes, Spotify, and on newthreads.us.